Ruth Adler thought her life was over when her husband abandoned her for being unable to have children, until a chance encounter at a community kitchen introduced her to Daniel Brooks, a struggling black single father raising 3 kids alone who showed her that family, love, and miracles have nothing to do with biology. When Daniel instinctively gathered 5 children under his care one chaotic evening, including 2 scared strangers, Ruth witnessed something that shattered everything she thought she knew about motherhood and belonging. What started as volunteering to escape her pain became a journey that would redefine her entire understanding of what it means to be family, proving that sometimes the most broken people create the safest places to heal. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this story about finding love in unexpected places will remind you that the best miracles are the ones we never saw coming. The morning light came through the bedroom window soft and golden, the kind of light that should have meant new beginnings. Ruth Adler stood at the dresser, watching her husband pack a suitcase with methodical precision. Each folded shirt, each rolled pair of socks, everything carefully placed like he'd been planning this for weeks. Maybe he had been. "Mark," she said quietly. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Small. "Can we just talk about this?" He didn't look up, just kept folding a blue button-down she'd given him for Christmas. "There's nothing to talk about, Ruth. I've made my decision. But we could try again. There are other options. We could look into adoption, or—" "I don't want other options." Mark finally met her eyes. His face was calm, too calm, like he'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "I want my own children. Biological children, a real family, and you can't give me that." The words hit like a physical blow. Ruth's hand went to the dresser to steady herself. "That's not fair. The doctor said it's not impossible, just unlikely. I know what they said." Mark zipped the suitcase closed with a sharp sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "I've given this 3 years, Ruth. 3 years of hoping and waiting and disappointment. I'm 36 years old. I don't have time to keep hoping for something that's probably never going to happen." "So that's it? I'm defective? So you're leaving?" "Don't make this dramatic." He lifted the suitcase off the bed. "I'm not saying you're defective. I'm saying we want different things. You want to keep trying for something that might never work. I want to move on with my life." Ruth felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. "We took vows, Mark, for better or worse. And this is the worst part, and I'm choosing not to stay in it." He walked toward the bedroom door, then paused. For a moment, Ruth thought he might turn around, might change his mind, might remember the woman he'd married 4 years ago and loved enough to promise forever. But he just said, "I'll have someone come for the rest of my things next week," and walked out. Ruth stood frozen, listening to his footsteps down the stairs. The front door opening, closing, his car starting in the driveway, the sound of the engine fading as he drove away. Then silence. Complete, crushing silence. Ruth sank onto the bed, their bed, though it wasn't theirs anymore, and stared at the empty space where Mark's nightstand items used to be. His phone charger, his reading glasses, the spy novel he'd been working through for months, all gone, like he'd been erasing himself from this house piece by piece, and she'd been too hopeful to notice. She looked down at her left hand. The diamond ring caught the morning light, throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. Such a pretty lie. Ruth twisted the ring off her finger. It left a pale indent in her skin, a ghost of what used to be there. The house was too quiet. Ruth walked through it like she was seeing it for the first time. The living room with furniture they'd picked out together, the kitchen where they'd cooked Sunday breakfasts, the spare bedroom they'd painted yellow 2 years ago, full of hope and plans, and a crib they'd bought too early. Ruth opened the closet in that room. Baby clothes still hanging with tags attached, a mobile with stars and moons, board books about barnyard animals. She'd collected these things gradually, each purchase a small act of faith that someday, somehow, she'd have a child to use them. Now they just looked like evidence of her failure. She closed the closet door and left the room, pulling it shut behind her. Maybe she'd deal with that tomorrow, or next week, or never. In the kitchen, Ruth made coffee she didn't want and toast she wouldn't eat. She sat at the table and opened her laptop, needing something, anything, to fill the silence pressing in from all sides. Her email inbox was full of the usual: sales ads, newsletter subscriptions, a reminder about her dentist appointment, and then, near the bottom, something different. A message from Hope Community Kitchen with the subject line, "Volunteers Needed." Ruth almost deleted it. She didn't remember signing up for their mailing list, though she must have at some point. Maybe during one of those late-night spirals when she'd tried to find meaning in helping others. She opened it anyway. Hope Community Kitchen serves free meals to families in need every Tuesday and Thursday evening. We're looking for volunteers to help with food prep, serving, and cleanup. No experience necessary, just a willing heart and a few hours of your time. If you're looking for a way to give back to your community, we'd love to have you. A willing heart. Ruth almost laughed. She wasn't sure she had a heart anymore, just a hollow space where one used to be. But she clicked sign up anyway, filled out the form with her name, email, and available times. Hit submit before she could talk herself out of it. Maybe helping people who actually had real problems would make her own seem smaller. Or maybe she just needed to be somewhere that wasn't this too-quiet house full of ghosts and broken promises. Either way, she'd find out Tuesday. Daniel Brooks finished mopping the last hallway of Jefferson Elementary at 6:47 a.m. His shift had started at 10 the night before, 8 hours of emptying trash, cleaning bathrooms, and making sure the school was ready for another day of kids who wouldn't notice his work unless he didn't do it. His back ached, his knees hurt. But the paycheck would clear on Friday, and that's what mattered. Daniel stored the mop and bucket in the janitor's closet, clocked out, and headed for the parking lot. His car, a 2008 Honda Accord with a dent in the passenger door and a check engine light that had been on for 6 months, started on the third try. Small victories. He drove across town as the sun came up, past closed storefronts and early morning bus stops. By 7:30, he was parked outside Riverside Elementary, waiting for the doors to open. At 7:45, kids started pouring out. Daniel spotted his 3 immediately. Caleb emerged first, 12 years old and serious, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He scanned the parking lot with the careful awareness of a kid who'd learned too young that the world could disappoint you. When he saw his father's car, his shoulders relaxed just slightly. Naomi came next, 9 years old with braided hair and her mother's smile. She waved enthusiastically when she spotted Daniel, her whole face lighting up. Eli was last, 5 years old and dragging a backpack almost as big as he was. He ran toward the car with the fearless energy of the youngest child, completely confident that his father would always be there waiting. Daniel got out and opened the back door. How was morning care? Boring, Caleb said, climbing into the front seat. They made us watch the same movie as last week. I made a picture, Eli announced, pulling a crumpled paper from his backpack. It showed a house, some stick figures, and what might have been a dog or a dinosaur. That's us. That's real good, buddy. Daniel buckled Eli into his booster seat. Naomi, you okay? Yeah. She slid into the middle seat. Miss Jessica said there's a field trip next month. Can I go? How much? $15. Daniel did the math in his head. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. The field trip would mean skipping something else. But Naomi rarely asked for anything. Yeah, baby, you can go. Her smile was worth whatever he'd have to sacrifice. They drove home, a 2-bedroom apartment in a building that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled like someone's cooking and old carpet. Their unit was on the third floor, number 3C, with a window that looked out at the parking lot and a kitchen barely big enough for one person, let alone four. Daniel unlocked the door, and the kids filed in, dropping backpacks and shoes in the small entryway. "Homework first," he said, though it was more habit than necessity. Caleb always did his homework. Naomi usually did. Eli was in kindergarten and mostly just colored. "Dad, what's for dinner?" Caleb asked. Daniel opened the refrigerator. Half a loaf of bread, some eggs, milk that would be good for maybe 2 more days. The pantry had rice and beans and not much else. He'd meant to go grocery shopping yesterday, but after his shift he'd been too tired to do anything except sleep for 4 hours before the kids got home from school. "I'm thinking we eat out tonight," he said. Eli perked up. "McDonald's?" "Not exactly." Daniel pulled out his phone and found the flyer he'd saved last week. "There's a place that serves free dinners on Tuesday nights. Community kitchen, good food, and you don't have to pay." Caleb's face tightened. He hated charity, hated anything that made them look poor. "We're fine. We've got food here. We've got rice and eggs. You guys need real vegetables and protein." Daniel kept his voice gentle. "It's not charity, Caleb. It's community. People helping people. Nothing wrong with that." "I want to go," Naomi said. "Miss Jessica volunteers there sometimes. She says it's nice." Eli nodded enthusiastically. "Can I get dessert?" "We'll see what they have." Daniel looked at Caleb. "You coming, or you staying here by yourself?" Caleb sighed the long-suffering sigh of a 12-year-old who knew he didn't really have a choice. "I'm coming." They left at 5, walking the 6 blocks to Hope Community Kitchen because the car was almost out of gas, and Daniel was saving what was left for the week. The evening was cool, but not cold. Spring was trying to arrive, pushing through the last grip of winter. The community kitchen was in the basement of a church, not the fancy part with stained glass and cushioned pews, but the practical part with folding tables and fluorescent lights. The doors were open, and Daniel could smell something good cooking. Chicken, maybe. Bread. Inside, volunteers moved around a large kitchen area. People were already lining up for food, families with kids, older folks, a few people who looked like they'd been sleeping rough. No one was judging. No one was asking questions. Just offering what they had. Daniel signed his family in at the front table. A woman with kind eyes and gray hair handed him 4 tickets. "First time?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Welcome. Dinner's at 6. Feel free to find a seat wherever." They found an empty table near the back. Eli swung his legs, excited. Naomi looked around with curious eyes. Caleb sat with his arms crossed, trying to look like he didn't care. Daniel was about to say something, maybe try to ease the tension, when the main doors opened and 2 children walked in alone. A girl, maybe 7, holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been more than 4. Both looked scared. The girl's eyes scanned the room frantically like she was searching for someone who wasn't there. The room got louder suddenly. Someone dropped a pan in the kitchen. A baby started crying. The little boy with the scared girl began to cry too, and then he was pulling away from his sister, overwhelmed. Daniel saw it happen in slow motion, the girl trying to calm her brother. Other volunteers noticing but not knowing what to do. The chaos building. He stood up without thinking and walked over, knelt down in front of the 2 scared kids. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" The girl shook her head. "We were supposed to meet our mom here, but she's not here yet. And he's scared." "That's okay to be scared. What's your name?" "I'm Zara. This is Marcus." "I'm Daniel. Those are my kids over there. Caleb, Naomi, and Eli. You want to sit with us until your mom gets here?" Zara looked uncertain. Daniel understood. Stranger danger was real, but he also saw how exhausted she looked, how much she needed someone to help carry the weight. "Tell you what," he said. "See that lady with the gray hair at the front desk? Her name is Mrs. Henson. You go tell her your mom's name and that you're waiting for her. Then if you want, you can sit with us, just until she shows up. Deal?" Zara nodded. She took Marcus's hand and walked to the front desk. Daniel returned to his table. Caleb was watching him carefully. "You can't save everyone, Dad." "Not trying to save anyone, just offering a chair." A few minutes later, Zara and Marcus appeared at their table. "Mrs. Henson said we could sit here." "Good. Pull up some chairs." Daniel made space. "This is Caleb, Naomi, and Eli." "Hi," Naomi said warmly. Eli waved. Caleb nodded once. The 5 children sat together at one table. The noise of the room continued around them, but at their table, things felt calmer, safer. Daniel looked around and caught the eye of a volunteer across the room, a woman with light brown hair and tired eyes, wearing a Hope Community Kitchen apron that looked brand new. She was staring at their table with an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or recognition, like she was seeing something she didn't expect. Ruth had arrived at the community kitchen at 4:30 p.m., 2 hours before her shift was supposed to start. She couldn't stay in the house anymore, not with Mark's absence filling every room like a presence of its own. Mrs. Henson, the volunteer coordinator, had welcomed her warmly and handed her an apron. "Have you ever done this before?" "No, but I'm a fast learner." "That's all we need." Mrs. Henson showed her to the kitchen. "We've got chicken roasting, green beans to prep, and rolls to butter. Pick whatever sounds good." Ruth had chosen green beans. Simple, repetitive, therapeutic, almost. The steady rhythm of trimming and snapping. She worked in silence while other volunteers chatted around her, their easy conversation a reminder that the world kept turning even when your own world stopped. At 6, the doors opened for dinner service. Ruth moved to the serving line, ladling green beans onto plates. The families filed through, tired parents, energetic kids, elderly people who smiled and said thank you, like the meal was a gift and not something they were entitled to. Ruth tried not to look at the children too closely. Each one felt like a small knife, a reminder of what she couldn't have, what Mark had left her for not being able to give him. Then the chaos started. 2 children came in alone, clearly lost and scared. The little boy started crying. The noise level rose. Ruth felt her chest tighten with panic, not at the situation, but at the reminder of how desperately she'd wanted this, the mess and noise and beautiful chaos of children. She was about to step away, escape to the kitchen, when she saw him. A black man, maybe late 30s, moved toward the crying children with calm authority. He knelt down, spoke to them gently, offered help without making them feel small. And then he gathered them, these 2 scared children, along with his own 3 kids at one table. 5 children together. Not his exactly, but in his care. Ruth watched, frozen, as the man made sure everyone had water, as he spoke to each child with the same gentle attention, as his own kids welcomed the strangers without hesitation. One of his daughters, maybe 9 or 10, literally split her roll in half and gave part to the scared little girl. Ruth felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, opening. Mrs. Henson appeared beside her. "That's Daniel Brooks. Good man, widowed a couple years ago, raising those 3 kids alone, working nights, still makes time to help others." Ruth couldn't look away from the table. "He just took those kids in, like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing. It was everything." Mrs. Henson smiled. "That's what family looks like, Ruth. Not blood, just presence." The words hit harder than they should have. Ruth turned away, blinking back sudden tears, and went back to ladling green beans like her life depended on it, but she couldn't stop stealing glances at that table, at 5 children laughing together, at a man who already had more than enough on his plate but still made room for 2 more, at a picture of family that looked nothing like what she'd imagined, but somehow felt more real than anything she'd lost. Ruth returned to the community kitchen 2 days later on Thursday evening. She'd spent the 48 hours in between trying to convince herself not to go back. She had plenty of things to do at home, boxes to pack, Mark's belongings to sort through, a life to dismantle piece by piece. But Thursday at 4 o'clock, she found herself pulling into the church parking lot anyway. Mrs. Henson greeted her like an old friend. "Ruth, I was hoping you'd come back. How are you settling in?" "Good, fine." Ruth tied on her apron, avoiding eye contact. "What do you need me to do today?" "Mashed potatoes. Think you can handle the mixer?" Ruth nodded and escaped to the kitchen. She worked in silence, adding butter and milk to the steaming potatoes, trying not to think about why she'd really come back. It wasn't about serving food or helping people. It was about that table, those 5 children, that man who'd made room without hesitation. She wanted to see if it was real, if she'd imagined the warmth there. At 6, the doors opened. Ruth took her position on the serving line, this time handling the mashed potatoes. Families came through, different faces from Tuesday, but the same tired gratitude, the same quiet dignity. Then she heard a child's voice. "Dad, look! They have mac and cheese!" Ruth looked up. Daniel Brooks was walking through the door with his 3 children. The boy, Caleb, she remembered, walked slightly ahead, trying to look independent. The daughter, Naomi, held her father's hand. The smallest one, Eli, bounced with each step. Daniel saw Ruth and gave a small nod of recognition. Not familiar. Exactly. Just acknowledgement. "You were here Tuesday. I remember you." Ruth nodded back, her throat suddenly tight. The Brooks family moved through the line. When they reached Ruth's station, Eli looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are those real potatoes or the fake kind?" "Eli," Daniel said quietly. "That's not polite." "It's okay." Ruth found herself smiling. "They're real. I made them myself." "Cool." Eli held out his plate. "Can I have a lot?" "You can have as much as you want." She served all 4 of them, trying not to notice how thin their plates looked before the food went on, trying not to notice Daniel's worn work boots or the frayed collar on Caleb's jacket. They found a table near the window. Ruth watched them from the serving line, watched how Daniel made sure his kids had everything they needed before he touched his own food, watched Naomi cut up Eli's chicken without being asked, watched Caleb scan the room constantly, always alert, always protective. A family, broken by loss but held together by love. Ruth's chest ached. After the dinner rush slowed, Mrs. Henson pulled Ruth aside. "Why don't you take a break? Eat something yourself. You've been working hard." "I'm not hungry." "Ruth." Mrs. Henson's voice was gentle but firm. "You've barely eaten anything all week. I can tell. Go sit down. Take care of yourself." Ruth wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She filled a plate, mostly vegetables, a little chicken, and looked for an empty table. "Miss Ruth." Eli was waving at her from across the room. "You can sit with us." Daniel looked up, surprised. He started to say something, probably to tell his son not to bother the volunteers, but Ruth was already walking over. "If that's okay," she said quietly. Daniel gestured to the empty chair. "Of course." Ruth sat down. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Naomi broke the silence. "Did you really make these potatoes?" "I did. They're really good, better than the box kind." "Thank you." Eli pointed his fork at Ruth. "What's your name?" "Eli Manners," Daniel said. "No, it's fine." Ruth set down her fork. "I'm Ruth. I'm Eli, I'm 5. That's Naomi. She's 9. And that's Caleb. He's 12 and thinks he's the boss." "I am the boss when Dad's at work," Caleb muttered. Daniel sighed. "Nobody's the boss. We're a team." "What do you do?" Naomi asked Ruth. "Like, for a job?" It was an innocent question, but it hit hard. Ruth had worked in marketing before she got married. Then Mark had wanted her to focus on starting a family, so she'd quit. Now she had no job, no children, and no husband. "Right now, I'm between things," Ruth said carefully, figuring out what comes next. "My dad works at night," Eli announced. "He cleans schools. Sometimes he comes home and smells like bleach." "Eli," Daniel's voice held gentle warning. "What?" "You do." Ruth found herself smiling despite everything. "That sounds like hard work." "It pays the bills." Daniel met her eyes. "Most of them, anyway." There was no shame in his voice, just fact. Ruth admired that. The ability to state his reality without apology or embarrassment. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Ruth watched the children interact. The way Caleb passed the salt before Naomi asked for it. The way Eli shared his role with his father without being told. Small gestures that showed deep care. "Can I ask you something?" Naomi said suddenly, looking at Ruth. "Why do you volunteer here?" "Naomi, that's personal," Daniel started. "It's okay." Ruth set down her fork. The honest answer was too complicated. "Because my husband left me for being broken. Because I can't have children. Because I needed somewhere to go where I wasn't alone with my failure." But she couldn't say that to a 9-year-old. "I wanted to help people," she said instead, "and I had some extra time." Naomi nodded, accepting this. "That's nice. Most people don't help when they don't have to." "Your family helps people," Ruth said. "I saw you on Tuesday, with those 2 kids who were scared." "Oh, Zara and Marcus." Naomi's face brightened. "Their mom showed up eventually. She'd been stuck at work, but it was nice to sit with them until she came." "You shared your role with the girl." Naomi shrugged like it was nothing. She looked hungry. Ruth felt that crack in her chest widen. This child, this 9-year-old who probably didn't have much herself, had seen someone in need and responded with pure generosity. "That was very kind," Ruth managed. Daniel was watching her carefully. Not suspicious, exactly. Just observant. Like he was trying to figure out what she wasn't saying. Mrs. Henson appeared at their table. "Ruth, honey, I hate to interrupt, but could you help with cleanup? We're short-handed tonight." "Of course." Ruth stood quickly, grateful for the escape. She'd been feeling too much, too fast. "It was nice talking to you all." "Bye, Miss Ruth." Eli waved enthusiastically. Ruth retreated to the kitchen and threw herself into washing dishes. The hot water and repetitive motion were soothing. She didn't have to think, didn't have to feel, but she could still hear the Brooks family in the dining area. Eli's laugh, Daniel's low voice telling his kids to help stack chairs, the sound of a family moving through the world together. Mrs. Henson appeared beside her, drying dishes. "There's something special, aren't they?" "Who?" "Don't play coy. The Brooks family. Daniel and those kids." Ruth focused on scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot. "They seem nice." "Nice." Mrs. Henson chuckled. "Ruth, I've been volunteering here for 15 years. I've seen a lot of families come through those doors. Most of them are just trying to survive. But Daniel, he's doing more than surviving. He's building something. Raising those kids with love and dignity even when everything's stacked against him. He's a good father. He's a good man. Lost his wife 2 years ago to cancer. Could have given up. Could have let bitterness eat him alive. Instead, he shows up every day, works his fingers to the bone, loves those kids fierce." Mrs. Henson set down her towel. "And you know what else? He still makes room for others. Still has compassion left over for strangers." Ruth stopped scrubbing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw how you looked at that table, like you were watching something you thought you'd lost." Mrs. Henson's voice was gentle. "And I wanted you to know, family isn't always what we think it's going to be. Sometimes it's better." Ruth's vision blurred. She blinked hard. "I should finish these dishes." Mrs. Henson squeezed her shoulder and left her alone with her thoughts and the mountain of dirty pots. Daniel helped his kids clear their table and stack their chairs. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and Eli was starting to drag. Caleb looked exhausted too, though he'd never admit it. "Time to head home," Daniel said. "Do we have to?" Eli whined. "I like it here." "Yes, we have to. You've got school tomorrow." They were almost to the door when Caleb stopped. "Dad, I forgot my jacket." "Go get it. Quick." Caleb ran back to their table. Daniel waited by the door with Naomi and Eli. Through the kitchen window, he could see Ruth washing dishes, her movements quick and mechanical. She'd looked sad during dinner, not just regular sad, the kind of deep-down sad that came from loss. Daniel recognized it because he'd worn it himself for months after Sarah died. "Dad?" Naomi tugged his sleeve. "Is Miss Ruth okay?" "I don't know, baby. Why?" "She looked like she was going to cry when I asked why she volunteers." Daniel glanced back at the kitchen. "Sometimes people are fighting battles we can't see. Best thing we can do is be kind. Like you were to Zara and Marcus?" "Exactly like that." Caleb returned with his jacket. They walked the 6 blocks home through the cool evening. The street lights were coming on, casting yellow pools on the sidewalk. "I like Miss Ruth," Eli announced. "She's nice." "She seems nice," Daniel agreed. "Can we see her again?" "We'll probably see her next Tuesday if she's still volunteering." "Good." Eli grabbed Daniel's hand. "I hope she comes back." Daniel hoped so too, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Ruth didn't go back on Tuesday. She told herself it was because she had things to do, doctor's appointment, errands, organizing the house. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She was afraid. Afraid of that feeling she'd had sitting at Daniel's table, that sense of belonging, of being included in something warm and real. She couldn't afford to feel that, not when it would inevitably be taken away. Mark called that afternoon. Ruth saw his name on her phone screen and almost didn't answer, but some masochistic part of her needed to hear his voice. "Hello? Ruth, it's me." Like she didn't know, like she could forget. "What do you want, Mark?" "I'm calling about the house. My lawyer says we need to discuss the division of assets." Of course. Assets. Not memories. Not the life they'd built. Just things to be divided and distributed. "Fine. Have your lawyer contact me." "There's something else." Mark's voice shifted. "I wanted you to hear it from me first. I'm seeing someone." Ruth's hand tightened on the phone. "Already?" "We've been separated for 3 weeks. We were married for 4 years. Ruth, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'm moving on. You should too." Moving on. Like their marriage was a job she'd been fired from. Like she could just update her resume and find a replacement. "Was there someone before?" Ruth asked. The words came out before she could stop them. "Before you left?" Silence. "Mark, answer me." "There was. Someone I met at work. Nothing happened while we were together. I wouldn't do that. But I knew there was potential there, and I realized I couldn't keep waiting for you to give me what I needed." Ruth felt dizzy. "So you left me for her?" "I left because our marriage wasn't working. Karen is just a possibility, a fresh start." Karen. She even had a name. Ruth wondered if Karen could have children, if that's what made her better, more valuable, more worthy of love. "I have to go," Ruth whispered. "Ruth." She hung up, sat on the couch in her silent house, and stared at nothing. Mark was moving on, building a new life, probably planning the family he'd always wanted with someone whose body could cooperate. And Ruth was stuck, frozen in this in-between place, not wife and not single, not childless by choice, and not a mother. She picked up her phone and opened her email, found the volunteer schedule for Hope Community Kitchen, stared at it for a long time. Then she deleted it. She couldn't go back, couldn't keep torturing herself by watching other people have what she couldn't. It was too hard, too painful. Ruth curled up on the couch and let herself cry. Big, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. She cried for her marriage, for her empty womb, for the children she'd never have, for the loneliness that stretched out in front of her like an endless road. She cried until she had nothing left. Thursday evening at the community kitchen, Daniel scanned the volunteer area while his kids went through the food line. Ruth wasn't there. He told himself it didn't matter. He barely knew the woman. She'd volunteered twice, shared one meal with his family. Her presence or absence shouldn't register. But it did. "Where's Miss Ruth?" Eli asked when they sat down to eat. "I don't know, buddy. Maybe she was busy. But she said she'd be back." "She didn't actually say that," Caleb pointed out. "But I thought—" Eli's face fell. "Do you think she's not coming back?" Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd seen that look in Ruth's eyes at dinner. That look that said she was barely holding herself together. People who looked like that sometimes disappeared. Sometimes the weight got too heavy, and they stopped showing up. "Maybe she'll come next week," Naomi said gently. "Sometimes people just need a break." "But what if she's sad? What if she needs help like Zara and Marcus did?" Daniel pulled Eli close. "We can't help everyone, buddy. Sometimes people have to work through their own stuff. But you always help people. I help when I can, when people let me. But Miss Ruth didn't ask for help." Eli considered this. Maybe she doesn't know how to ask. The words hit harder than they should have. Daniel thought about Sarah in those last months. How she'd tried to be brave, tried to hold it together for the kids, even when the pain was unbearable. How she'd rarely asked for help because she didn't want to be a burden. Maybe Ruth was like that. Maybe she was drowning quietly, and no one could tell. After dinner, Daniel found Mrs. Henson wiping down tables. "Mrs. Henson, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Daniel." "Ruth, the volunteer from last week, is she okay?" Mrs. Henson's face softened. "I don't know if I should share her business. I'm not asking for details. Just, she seemed sad, and now she's not here. I'm worried." "That's kind of you." Mrs. Henson set down her rag. "All I can say is she's going through a hard time. A very hard time. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself." Daniel nodded. He understood that feeling intimately. "If you see her again," Mrs. Henson continued, "just be kind. Don't pry, don't push. Just be present. Sometimes that's all people need. And if she doesn't come back, then you pray she finds what she needs somewhere else." Daniel gathered his kids and they walked home through the spring evening. The air smelled like rain coming. The streetlights buzzed softly overhead. "Dad?" Naomi took his hand. "Do you think Miss Ruth is lonely?" "Maybe. That's sad. Being lonely is the worst." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Yeah, baby, it is." They walked in silence for a while. Then Caleb spoke, his voice quiet. "After Mom died, were you lonely? Even though you had us?" Daniel stopped walking, looked at his oldest son, this boy who was trying so hard to be a man before his time. "Yeah, I was. Love doesn't cancel out loneliness. It helps, but it doesn't fix it." "What does fix it?" "I don't know if it gets fixed. I think you just learn to carry it better. Find people who make it lighter." "Like us?" Eli asked. "Like you, and Mrs. Henson, and our neighbors, people who show up." Daniel started walking again. "That's why we help people when we can, because nobody should have to carry heavy things alone." "Even strangers?" Naomi asked. "Especially strangers, because strangers are just friends you haven't met yet." Eli yawned hugely. "I hope Miss Ruth comes back. I want her to be our friend." Daniel hoped so, too. But hope and reality didn't always match up. He'd learned that the hard way. They climbed the stairs to their apartment. Daniel unlocked the door and his kids tumbled inside, dropping backpacks and shoes in their usual chaos. Homework, then baths, then bed, Daniel announced. The usual chorus of groans followed. But they complied, because that's what they did. They showed up. They followed through. They carried on. Daniel started water for dishes and looked out the kitchen window at the city lights stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, Ruth was alone in her sadness, and he had no way to help her, unless she came back. Saturday morning, Daniel woke up to find Naomi standing beside his bed, her face serious. "Dad, we need to talk." He blinked at the clock. 7:23 a.m. His one day to sleep past 7, and she was waking him for a conversation. "Can it wait until after coffee?" "No, it's important." Daniel sat up, immediately worried. "Is someone hurt? Is something wrong?" "Kind of, but not with us." Naomi climbed onto the bed and sat cross-legged, her hands folded in her lap. "It's about Miss Ruth." Daniel rubbed his eyes. "Baby, we talked about this. Miss Ruth is an adult. She makes her own choices. But what if she doesn't come back because she thinks nobody cares? What if she's like those kids who come to the kitchen alone and scared, but she's a grown-up so nobody notices?" "Naomi, Mom used to say that being grown-up doesn't mean you stop needing people, remember? She said that all the time." Daniel's chest tightened. Sarah had said that. Usually when Daniel was trying too hard to carry everything himself, refusing to accept help from friends or family. "I remember. So if Miss Ruth needs people and she's not coming to the kitchen, maybe we should go to her. Tell her we miss her, that we want her to come back. We don't even know where she lives. Mrs. Henson would know. She has all the volunteer information." Daniel looked at his 9-year-old daughter, at her earnest face and determined eyes. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Naomi was quiet for a moment. "Because she looked at us the way I feel sometimes, like she was on the outside looking in at something she wanted but couldn't have. And I know what that feels like. It's lonely." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "You're a good person, you know that?" "So you'll ask Mrs. Henson?" "I'll think about it." "Dad." "I said I'll think about it. That's the best I can do right now." Naomi sighed, but accepted this. She slid off the bed and headed for the door, then turned back. "Mom would want us to help her." After she left, Daniel lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Sarah would want them to help. That was absolutely true. His wife had never been able to walk past someone in need without stopping. It had driven him crazy sometimes, how she'd give away their last dollar, invite strangers for dinner, spend hours listening to people's problems. But it had also been one of the things he loved most about her, her enormous heart, her inability to turn away from suffering. Daniel got up and made coffee. By the time he emerged from his bedroom, all 3 kids were awake and eating cereal at the kitchen table. "So?" Naomi looked at him expectantly. "So what? Did you think about it? I literally just woke up. But you're thinking about it now, right?" Caleb looked up from his cereal. "What's she talking about?" "Your sister wants me to track down Miss Ruth and invite her back to the community kitchen." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Because she's sad and lonely and needs friends," Naomi said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Caleb considered this. "That's not the worst idea." "Thank you." Naomi turned back to Daniel. "See? Caleb agrees." "I didn't say I agreed. I said it wasn't the worst idea. There's a difference." "But you don't think it's a bad idea?" Naomi pressed. Caleb shrugged. "I mean, Miss Ruth was nice, and she looked like she needed people. If we can help, why not?" "Because maybe she doesn't want help," Daniel said. "Maybe she stopped coming because she wants to be left alone. Or maybe she stopped coming because she thinks nobody cares," Naomi countered. Eli, who'd been quietly eating his cereal, suddenly spoke up. "I vote we help her." "This isn't a democracy," Daniel said. "But if it was, we'd win," Naomi pointed out. 3-1. Daniel couldn't help but smile. His kids were ganging up on him, and they weren't even subtle about it. Fine, I'll call Mrs. Henson, but I'm not promising anything. If Miss Ruth doesn't want to be contacted, we have to respect that. Okay. Naomi jumped up and hugged him. Thank you, Dad. You're the best. Yeah. Finish your breakfast. Daniel waited until after lunch to call Mrs. Henson. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and familiar. Daniel, this is a nice surprise. What can I do for you? I have a question, and it might sound strange. Try me. Ruth, the volunteer from last week. My kids are worried about her. She seemed sad, and now she's not coming back, and they want to make sure she's okay. Mrs. Henson was quiet for a moment. That's very sweet of them. So? Would it be appropriate for me to reach out to her? Just to say we miss seeing her. Or would that be overstepping? Oh, Daniel, Mrs. Henson sighed. I think Ruth could use a friend right now, but I can't give you her information without her permission. Privacy rules. I understand. However, I could give her your information. Let her decide if she wants to reach out. That works. Give me your number. I'll call her today. Daniel recited his phone number. After he hung up, he felt strangely nervous, like he'd just asked someone on a date instead of simply offering friendship to a lonely stranger. Naomi appeared in the doorway. Well, Mrs. Henson is going to give Ruth my number. If Ruth wants to talk, she can call. And if she doesn't call? Then we respect her choice and move on. Naomi nodded, but Daniel could see the worry in her eyes. She wanted so badly for this to work out, for Ruth to be okay, for kindness to be enough. Daniel wished he could promise her that, but life had taught him that sometimes kindness wasn't enough. Sometimes people stayed broken no matter how much you tried to help. Ruth was folding laundry when her phone rang. Mrs. Henson's name appeared on the screen. Ruth almost didn't answer. She'd ignored 3 emails from the community kitchen this week, the automated ones reminding her of her volunteer shifts. She knew Mrs. Henson was probably calling to ask why she'd stopped showing up, but ignoring calls felt cowardly. Ruth answered. Hi, Mrs. Henson. Ruth, dear, how are you? I'm fine, just busy. Too busy to volunteer? Ruth winced. I'm sorry. I should have let you know I couldn't make it. Things have been complicated. I understand complicated. Mrs. Henson's voice was gentle. But I'm not calling to guilt you about missing shifts. I'm calling because someone's been asking about you. Ruth's heart jumped. Who? Daniel Brooks, the man with the 3 children. He called me today, said his kids are worried about you. Ruth sat down on the couch. Why would they be worried? Because you seemed sad, and then you disappeared, and they wanted to make sure you were okay. Tears pricked at Ruth's eyes. That's very kind. They wanted me to give you Daniel's phone number, in case you wanted to talk, or just know that someone's thinking about you. Mrs. Henson paused. Can I give it to you? Ruth should say no. Should keep the distance she'd carefully constructed between herself and that warm, chaotic family. But instead she heard herself say, yes. Mrs. Henson recited the number. Ruth wrote it down on the back of an envelope. Ruth, Mrs. Henson said quietly, I don't know what you're going through, but I do know that isolating yourself won't make it better. Sometimes we need people, even when we don't think we deserve them. After they hung up, Ruth stared at the number for a long time. She thought about Mark and his new girlfriend Karen, about the life she couldn't give him, about the empty rooms in her house and the empty space in her heart. Then she thought about Daniel's table at the community kitchen, 5 children laughing together. Naomi sharing her role, Daniel making room without hesitation. She thought about Eli asking if the mashed potatoes were real, and Naomi asking why she volunteered, and the way Daniel had looked at her. Not with pity, but with understanding. Ruth picked up her phone and dialed before she could change her mind. It rang twice. Then a man's voice answered. Hello? Daniel, This is Ruth from the community kitchen. Ruth. Hi. He sounded genuinely pleased. Thanks for calling. Mrs. Henson said your kids were worried about me. Yeah, especially Naomi. She noticed you seemed sad, and then when you didn't come back, he trailed off. We just wanted to make sure you were okay. Ruth's throat tightened. That's really kind. I'm okay, just dealing with some personal stuff. I get that, no pressure. But if you want to talk or just, I don't know, have coffee or something, as friends, the kids would love to see you. Ruth closed her eyes. This was the moment. She could make excuses, keep her distance, stay safe in her lonely bubble. Or she could take a risk, let people in, accept the kindness being offered. I'd like that, she heard herself say. Coffee sounds nice. Yeah, great. When works for you? Tomorrow, Sunday afternoon? Sunday's perfect. There's a coffee shop on Maple Street, corner of 5th, Jake's Coffee House. You know it? I can find it. 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock, Ruth confirmed. Okay, see you then. Daniel paused. And Ruth? I'm glad you called. After they hung up, Ruth sat in silence. Her heart was pounding like she'd just done something dangerous. Maybe she had. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. She felt curious, maybe even a little bit hopeful. Sunday afternoon, Ruth arrived at Jake's Coffee House at 1:55 p.m. She'd changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a simple sweater. Casual, not trying too hard. The coffee shop was busy with the after-church crowd. Ruth ordered a latte and found a table near the window. She was early. She could still leave. Daniel would understand. Or maybe he wouldn't even show up. Maybe he'd changed his mind. But at exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened, and Daniel walked in with all 3 kids. Ruth's heart sank. She'd thought coffee meant just the 2 of them, a conversation between adults. But of course he'd brought his children. He probably couldn't afford a babysitter. Or maybe he brought them everywhere because that's what single parents did. Daniel spotted her and waved. The kids followed him to her table. Sorry we're a little loud, Daniel said with a smile. Hope that's okay. It's fine. Ruth tried to sound like she meant it. Hi. Miss Ruth. Eli climbed onto the chair beside her. Dad said we could get hot chocolate. That sounds good. Daniel ordered for the kids, then got himself a black coffee. When he returned to the table, he looked almost as nervous as Ruth felt. Thanks for coming, he said. Thanks for inviting me. Naomi leaned forward. We missed you at the kitchen. Did something bad happen? Naomi, Daniel said gently. That's personal. It's okay. Ruth looked at this 9-year-old with her honest eyes and open heart. Something kind of sad happened, but I'm working through it. Are you lonely? Naomi asked. Naomi. Yes, Ruth said. The word came out before she could stop it. Yes, I'm lonely. Eli patted her hand. You can be lonely with us. Then you won't be alone. Ruth felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. That's very sweet. We know about being lonely, Naomi said. After our mom died, we were lonely even though we had each other. Dad says that's normal. Ruth looked at Daniel. Your wife. I'm so sorry. Thank you. It was 2 years ago. Cancer. Daniel's voice was matter-of-fact, but Ruth could see the old pain in his eyes. Hardest thing I've ever been through, but we survived it. Made us stronger, I think. How? Ruth asked. How did you survive it? Daniel thought for a moment. One day at a time. Leaning on people when I had to. Letting my kids see me cry sometimes. And remembering that Sarah would want us to keep living, not just existing. Dad cried a lot, Eli said matter-of-factly. Sometimes he still does. Eli? What? You do. It's okay to cry. Daniel smiled despite himself. Yes, it's okay to cry. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Caleb, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Why are you lonely, Miss Ruth? Caleb, that's too personal, Daniel said. No, she said something sad happened. I want to know what. Caleb looked at Ruth directly. Is it okay to ask? Ruth took a breath. These children deserved honesty. My husband left me a few weeks ago because I can't have children. The table went quiet. Even Eli stopped swinging his legs. That's stupid, Caleb said finally. Caleb, no, Dad, it is. You don't leave people because they can't do something they can't control. That's like leaving someone because they're sick or they lost their job. It's stupid and mean. Ruth felt something crack open in her chest. Thank you. I've been feeling like it was my fault somehow. It's not, Naomi said firmly. If someone leaves you for something you can't help, that's their problem, not yours. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed Ruth's hand briefly. My kids are blunt, but they're not wrong. What your husband did says everything about him and nothing about you. Ruth nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Do you like kids? Eli asked. Even though you can't have them? Eli, that's... Daniel started. I do, Ruth said. I love kids. That's part of why it hurts so much, knowing I'll never have my own. You could adopt, Naomi suggested. Or foster. Like the kids who come to the community kitchen. Maybe someday. Or you could borrow us, Eli said. We're pretty fun. Daniel laughed. I don't think that's how it works, buddy. But Ruth was smiling. That's a very generous offer. They talked for an hour. About small things, big things, everything in between. The kids told Ruth about school and their favorite movies and the time Eli got his head stuck between the stair railings. Daniel talked about his work, about the challenges of single parenting, about how he was just trying to keep his head above water most days. Ruth found herself telling them about her life before Mark left, about how she'd given up her job to focus on starting a family, about how lost she felt now, with no husband and no career and no clear path forward. You're good at volunteering, Naomi pointed out. You made really good mashed potatoes. That's something, Daniel agreed. Not everyone can make good mashed potatoes. It doesn't feel like enough, Ruth admitted. Maybe that's because you're measuring yourself against the wrong things, Daniel said gently. You're not less valuable because you can't have kids. You're not a failure because your marriage ended. You're just someone going through a hard time. And that's okay. Ruth looked at this man. This struggling, exhausted, beautiful man who was raising 3 children alone and still had room in his heart for a broken stranger. How are you so wise? She asked. I'm not. I just know what it's like to feel worthless. After Sarah died, I felt like I'd failed her, like I should have done more, been more. It took a long time to realize that some things are just beyond our control. Do you still feel that way? Like you failed her? Sometimes. But mostly I just miss her and try to live in a way that would make her proud. They left the coffee shop as the sun was starting to set. The kids were hyped up on hot chocolate and sugar cookies. Daniel walked Ruth to her car. Thank you for this, Ruth said, for reaching out, for caring. Thank you for calling back, for giving us a chance. Your kids are wonderful. They have their moments. Daniel smiled. Listen, we're going to the community kitchen on Tuesday. If you want to come back, we'd love to see you there. Ruth hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready. No pressure. Just know the invitation's open, always. Ruth drove home feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Not fixed, not healed, but less alone. When she got home, the house didn't feel quite so empty. She made herself dinner, real dinner, not just toast, and ate at the table instead of standing at the counter. Then she opened her laptop and found the volunteer schedule for Hope Community Kitchen. She stared at it for a long time. Finally, she clicked the button to sign up for Tuesday's shift. Tuesday evening, Ruth arrived at the community kitchen 15 minutes early. Her hands were shaking as she tied on her apron. She'd almost turned around 3 times on the drive over, convinced this was a mistake. But she'd made a promise. To herself, to Daniel's kids, to the part of her that was tired of hiding. Mrs. Henson greeted her with a warm hug. "I'm so glad you came back." "Me too, I think." "You'll be fine. Come on, let's get you set up with the green beans again." Ruth fell into the familiar rhythm of trimming and snapping. The repetitive motion calmed her nerves. Around her, other volunteers chatted and laughed. She didn't join in, but she didn't feel quite so separate from them either. At 6 o'clock, the doors opened. Ruth took her position on the serving line, this time handling the dinner rolls. She watched families come through, offering each one a warm smile and a, "How many would you like?" Then she heard Eli's voice. "Miss Ruth, you came back." Ruth looked up to see the Brooks family walking through the door. Eli was bouncing with excitement. Naomi was smiling. Even Caleb looked pleased. And Daniel was looking at her with something that might have been relief. "Hi," Ruth said, suddenly shy. "Hi yourself." Daniel's smile was warm. "I'm glad you're here." When they reached her station, Eli held out his plate. "Can I have 3 rolls?" "You can have 4 if you want." "Really?" "Really." She served all 4 of them, and this time she let herself notice the small details. How Caleb said thank you without being prompted. How Naomi asked if Ruth had made the rolls herself. How Daniel made sure his kids had everything they needed before moving on. They found their usual table by the window. Ruth expected them to settle in, but after a few minutes, Naomi came back to the serving line. "Miss Ruth, when you're done serving, do you want to eat with us?" Ruth's throat tightened. "Are you sure?" "We're sure. Dad said to ask." After the dinner rush slowed, Ruth filled a plate and joined them. It felt natural this time, less like an intrusion and more like belonging. They talked about school and work and the weather, normal things, easy things. Eli told her about his kindergarten teacher who wore funny socks. Naomi described the book she was reading. Caleb even mentioned that he'd made the basketball team, though he said it like it wasn't a big deal. "That's wonderful," Ruth said. "When's your first game?" "Thursday. But it's just practice squad stuff. Nothing important." "It's important," Daniel said firmly. "You worked hard for that spot." Caleb shrugged, but Ruth could see the pride in his eyes. After dinner, Ruth helped with cleanup. She was drying dishes when Daniel appeared beside her with a dish towel. "You don't have to help," she said. "You already served your family." "I know, but I wanted to." He picked up a plate and started drying. "Can I ask you something?" "Okay. What made you come back?" "Really?" Ruth was quiet for a moment, searching for the right words. "I was lonely and scared. And I kept thinking about your table, about how your kids made room for those 2 scared children without even thinking about it. And I realized I've been so focused on what I can't have that I stopped seeing what was right in front of me. Which is people, connection, the chance to be part of something even if it's not what I expected." She set down her dish towel. "I spent years planning for a life that's never going to happen. Maybe it's time to start living the life I actually have." Daniel nodded slowly. "After Sarah died, someone told me that grief is love with nowhere to go. I think the same is true for dreams. When they don't work out, all that hope and planning has nowhere to go. It just sits inside you, taking up space. So what do you do with it?" "You redirect it. Find new places for it to live." He gestured around the kitchen. "This place, these people, they're not what I planned either. But they're real. And they matter." Ruth felt tears threatening again. "I'm tired of crying." "Then don't. Or do. Whatever you need." Daniel's voice was gentle. "But don't apologize for feeling things. That's just being human." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. When everything was clean and put away, Daniel gathered his kids. "We're walking home," he said to Ruth. "Want to walk with us?" At least part of the way? Ruth hesitated, then nodded. I'd like that. They walked through the spring evening, the kids ranging ahead while Daniel and Ruth followed at a slower pace. The streetlights were coming on, casting everything in a warm glow. "Can I ask you something?" Ruth said, "and you can say no if it's too personal. Ask. Do you ever get angry at your wife for leaving you alone with all of this?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah, sometimes. Not at her, exactly. At the cancer. At God, maybe. At the unfairness of it all." He shoved his hands in his pockets. "Sarah didn't choose to leave, but I'm still the one left holding everything, and some days that feels impossible. But you keep going. What else can I do? Those 3 kids need me. They didn't ask for any of this either. So I get up every day and I do the work, and some days that's enough. Some days it has to be." They walked another block in silence. Then Ruth spoke again. "I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met." Daniel laughed, but it was a sad sound. "I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference." "I don't think so." They reached the corner where Ruth needed to turn off to get back to her car. The kids were half a block ahead, arguing about something. "Thank you for walking with me," Ruth said. "Thank you for coming back. For giving this," he gestured vaguely, "whatever this is, a chance." "What is this?" Ruth asked. "Honestly?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I think it's 2 people who understand what it's like to lose something important, trying to figure out how to keep living anyway, and maybe helping each other do that. I like that definition." "Me too." Ruth walked back to her car feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but something close to peace. Like maybe she didn't have to have her whole life figured out. Maybe she just had to show up and see what happened. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Ruth volunteered every Tuesday and Thursday. She ate dinner with the Brooks family. She learned that Naomi loved drawing, that Eli could recite the entire Pledge of Allegiance, but always forgot to brush his teeth, that Caleb was fiercely protective of his siblings, but surprisingly gentle with younger kids. She learned that Daniel took his coffee black because adding cream cost extra, that he hummed while he worked, that he had a laugh that came from deep in his chest and made everyone around him smile. And slowly, without really planning it, Ruth became part of their world. She went to Caleb's basketball game and cheered from the stands. She helped Naomi with a school project about the solar system. She played endless games of I Spy with Eli while waiting for dinner to be served. She didn't think about Mark as much, didn't obsess over her empty house or her childless state, didn't feel quite so broken, but she also felt something dangerous growing in her chest, something that felt like hope and attachment, and maybe even love. It terrified her. One Thursday evening, after the kitchen had closed and the kids were helping stack chairs, Mrs. Henson pulled Ruth aside. "You look different," the older woman said. "Lighter. I feel different. The Brooks family is good for you." "They are." Ruth hesitated. "Is that okay, to need them like this?" "Need isn't a bad word, Ruth. We all need people. The question is whether you're being honest about what you need and what you can give." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Henson's voice was gentle but direct. "I mean, you've been through a trauma. Your marriage ending, the infertility, all of it. And Daniel and his kids have given you something beautiful: acceptance, belonging, purpose. But you need to make sure you're not using them as a bandage for a wound that needs actual healing." The words stung because they were true. Ruth had been so focused on how good it felt to be around the Brooks family that she hadn't stopped to ask herself the hard questions. Was she healing, or was she just hiding? Was she building something real, or was she clinging to people who made her feel less broken? "I don't know," Ruth admitted. "I don't know if I'm healing or hiding." "Then maybe it's time to find out." "Mrs." Henson squeezed her arm. I'm not saying pull away, I'm saying be honest. With yourself and with them, because those kids are already attached to you, and if you're not sure you can stay, you need to figure that out before it goes any further. That night, Ruth lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Mrs. Henson's words echoed in her mind. Was she using the Brooks family? Taking what she needed without thinking about what they needed? She'd been so focused on how good it felt to be included, to be wanted, that she hadn't considered what would happen if this fell apart. Daniel had already lost one important woman in his life. His kids had already been abandoned by death. What right did Ruth have to enter their world when she was still so uncertain about her own? The next Tuesday, Ruth almost didn't go to the kitchen. She called in sick, stayed home, tried to convince herself that pulling back was the kindest thing she could do. But at 5:30 p.m., her phone rang. Daniel. "Hey," he said when she answered. "Mrs. Henson said you're not feeling well. Just a headache, I'll be fine." "Ruth." His voice was careful. "What's really going on?" She closed her eyes. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of needing you. Of needing your kids. Of building something that might fall apart and leave me more broken than I already am." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Can I come over? We should talk face to face." Ruth gave him her address. 20 minutes later, his car pulled into her driveway. She opened the door to find him standing there alone. "Where are the kids?" "Mrs. Henson's watching them. I thought we needed to have this conversation without little ears listening." Ruth let him inside. Her house suddenly felt too big, too quiet, too empty compared to the warm chaos of his apartment. They sat in the living room. Daniel looked around, taking in the tasteful furniture, the wedding photos she hadn't taken down yet, the evidence of a life that used to exist. "Nice place," he said. "It's too big for one person." "Yeah, I bet." Daniel turned to face her. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" Ruth took a breath. "Mrs. Henson said something that's been stuck in my head. She asked if I was healing or hiding, if I was being honest about what I need and what I can give. And I realized, I don't know. I know being around your family makes me feel better. But I don't know if that's real or if I'm just using you all as a distraction from my own mess." "And that scares you?" "It terrifies me. Because what if I'm not actually getting better? What if I'm just postponing the breakdown? And what if when it finally comes, I hurt you? Hurt your kids?" Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Can I tell you something? After Sarah died, I went through the same thing. I'd have good days where I felt almost normal, and then I'd crash, hard. And I felt guilty every time because the kids had already been through so much. They didn't need to see their dad falling apart." "What did you do?" "I learned that healing isn't linear. You don't just get better in a straight line. You have good days and bad days and days where you don't know what you're feeling, and that's okay. That's normal." He met her eyes. "You're not using us, Ruth. You're learning to live again. There's a difference." "But what if I can't? What if I pull away and disappoint everyone?" "Then you pull away, and we'll understand. Because we've been there too." Daniel's voice was steady. "But here's what I think. I think you're stronger than you realize. I think you've survived something that would have destroyed a lot of people. And I think you're exactly where you need to be." "How can you be sure?" "I can't. But I'm willing to take the risk. The question is whether you are." Ruth looked at this man sitting in her living room, this tired, brave, stubborn man who'd lost everything and kept going, who'd opened his heart to her without asking for anything in return. "I want to be," she whispered. "I want to be brave enough. Then start there, one day at a time, one moment at a time. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to keep showing up." They sat in silence for a while. Then Ruth spoke again. "Your kids, they've been through so much. I don't want to hurt them. They're tougher than you think." And they care about you. Not because they need you to replace Sarah, but because you're you. You're kind and honest and you listen to them. That's enough. Is it enough for you? The question hung in the air. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said finally. It's enough. Ruth felt something shift in her chest. Not fixing, not healing completely, just opening, making room. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll keep showing up. Daniel smiled. Good, because Eli's been asking about you nonstop. Kid's obsessed. Ruth laughed, and it felt real. He's pretty great. They all are, even when they're driving me crazy. Daniel stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. Ruth, thank you. For what? For being honest? For not running? For giving us a chance? After he left, Ruth stood in her empty house and realized it didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Not because anything had changed physically, but because she'd changed. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't healed. But she was no longer hiding. She was living. And that was enough. 3 weeks later, Ruth found herself in Daniel's apartment on a Sunday afternoon. Officially, she was there to help Naomi with her science fair project. Unofficially, it had become her second home. The apartment was chaos in the best way. Eli was building a fort out of couch cushions. Caleb was doing homework at the kitchen table. Naomi had construction paper and markers spread across every available surface. Daniel was attempting to fix the leaky kitchen faucet with mixed results. "This thing is older than me," he muttered, wrestling with a wrench. "Want help?" Ruth asked. "Do you know plumbing?" "No, but I'm good at holding flashlights and offering moral support." Daniel laughed. "That actually helps a lot." Ruth held the flashlight while Daniel worked. They fell into easy conversation. About work, about the kids' upcoming school events, about nothing important and everything that mattered. "Ruth," Naomi called from the living room. "Can you help me glue this part?" Ruth set down the flashlight and joined Naomi. They worked on the poster board together, discussing volcanoes and lava flows and the Earth's crust. Eli abandoned his fort to join them. "Can I help?" "You can draw the lava," Naomi said. Eli grabbed a red marker and went to town, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Ruth looked around the small apartment, at the kids working on projects, at Daniel fixing the sink, at the organized chaos that defined this family, and she realized something that took her breath away. This felt like home, not the house she'd shared with Mark, not some imagined future with children she'd never have. This, right here, right now, these people who'd let her in without asking for anything in return, who'd made room at their table and in their lives, who'd shown her that family wasn't about biology or bloodlines. It was about showing up, about presence, about love in its most ordinary and extraordinary forms. "Miss Ruth?" Eli tugged her sleeve. "Are you crying?" Ruth touched her face. She was crying, but not sad tears, something else entirely. "Happy tears," she managed. "Why are you happy crying?" "Because..." Ruth looked at all 3 kids watching her with curious, kind eyes. "Because I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Naomi smiled. "We're glad you're here." "Me too," Caleb added quietly from the kitchen table. Daniel appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. He took in the scene, Ruth crying, the kids gathered around her, the project spread across the floor. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Everything's perfect," Ruth said, and she meant it. That evening, after the science project was finished and Eli's fort was rebuilt properly, they all sat down to dinner. Daniel had made spaghetti, his specialty, which wasn't saying much, and the kids set the table without being asked. Ruth helped serve, moving through the small kitchen with practiced ease. She knew where the plates were kept now, where the cups lived, which drawer held the silverware. She knew that Caleb liked his spaghetti with extra sauce, that Naomi picked out the mushrooms, that Eli needed his cut into small pieces or he'd make a mess. She knew these things because she'd been paying attention, because she'd been present. They ate together, all 5 of them crowded around a table meant for 4. The conversation flowed easily. School stories, work updates, plans for the weekend. At one point, Eli reached over and held Ruth's hand. Just held it, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ruth squeezed back, her heart so full it hurt. After dinner, while Daniel washed dishes and the kids got ready for bed, Ruth stood by the window looking out at the city lights. She thought about where she'd been 3 months ago, broken, alone, convinced her life was over. And then she thought about where she was now, still broken in places but held together by something stronger than she'd imagined. Not medicine, not fate, not miracles in the way she'd always understood them. Just people. Just love, just the quiet courage to keep showing up. Daniel joined her at the window. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" Ruth turned to face him. "About how I used to think I was barren. That's the word that kept running through my mind. Barren, like I was empty, useless, nothing to give. And now? Now I realize I was never barren. I was just looking in the wrong places." She gestured to the apartment, to the kids brushing their teeth in the bathroom, to the life happening all around them. "This is what I was looking for. This is the miracle." Daniel's eyes were bright. "Yeah, it is." They stood together in comfortable silence. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice careful. "I need to tell you something. And I don't want you to feel pressured or rushed, but I need to be honest." Ruth's heart skipped. "Okay. These past few months, having you in our lives, it's been good. Really good. The kids love you, and He took a breath. "I'm starting to feel things I didn't think I'd feel again, and that scares me. But it also feels right." Ruth felt tears threatening again. "I feel it too, and it terrifies me. So what do? We keep showing up, one day at a time. We don't rush. We don't force anything. We just see what happens." Daniel nodded. "I can do that." "Me too." He reached out and took her hand. Not romantic exactly, just connection, just presence. They stood there, hand in hand, while the kids got ready for bed, and the city hummed outside, and life continued in all its messy, beautiful glory. 6 months later, Ruth stood in the community kitchen serving mashed potatoes. But this time, she wasn't a volunteer trying to fill empty hours. She was part of something. Daniel and the kids had just walked in. They waved at her, and she waved back, her heart full of a peace she'd never expected to find. Mrs. Henson appeared beside her. "You look happy?" "I am." "I'm proud of you, for not giving up, for staying." "I'm proud of me too," Ruth said. And she meant it. That evening, after dinner service ended, Ruth sat at a table with Daniel and his kids. 5 people who'd found each other through ordinary circumstances and built something extraordinary. "I have an announcement," Naomi said importantly. "We took a vote." "About what?" Daniel asked. "About Miss Ruth. And we've decided," she looked at her brothers, who nodded encouragingly, "that she's family now. Official family." Ruth's vision blurred. "You guys—" "It's true," Eli said. "You're always here. And you love us. And we love you. So that makes you family." Even Caleb nodded. "It's not the same as Mom. You're not trying to replace her. But you're yours. And that's important too." Daniel was looking at Ruth with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The kids have spoken. And what do you say?" Ruth asked quietly. Daniel smiled. "I say they're right. You're family, if you want to be." Ruth looked around the table at these 4 people who'd saved her life without even knowing it, who'd shown her that miracles weren't about getting what you thought you wanted. They were about finding what you actually needed. "I want to be," she whispered. "More than anything." Naomi jumped up and hugged her. Then Eli. Even Caleb joined in, making it a group hug that pulled Daniel in too. They stood there in the middle of the community kitchen, 5 people holding each other, and Ruth finally understood. She'd spent years thinking she was barren, empty, nothing to give, but she'd been wrong. She'd just been waiting for the right people to love, the right family to belong to, the right life to live. And now she'd found it. Not through biology, not through traditional paths, but through presence, through courage, through the simple act of showing up day after day, even when it scared her. This was the miracle. Not the one she'd prayed for, but the one she actually needed. 5 people, 1 table, 1 heart, family.